everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Alyssa's story. Last time we made a lot of base improvements, including but not limited to fencing for the horse we got at the end of day 10 and fencing for all the other types of animals. We also managed to completely close in and add in Nike and a few chickens to the compound. With our upgrades and increase in animal space, we also left with the animal trailer in search of more friends soon-to-be food. We came across a gold mine of a ranch, copped ourselves a cow, and had to hang out there for the end of day 20. Day 21, I woke up in the trailer and took a quick look around to make sure it was still secure. No windows seemed broken, no thumps or growls or groans could be heard, and peeking out the door yielded no ugly, hungry problems to deal with. I continued looping the property on foot, trying to loot as I go since I was running out of space in my car trunk. One more house was at the end of the road before the road turned back into itself, and the garage yielded some materials. I could see my car and trailer just beyond the side of the barn, and I ran over to make one last stop before my trunk reached near capacity and I would need to turn back. As I did this, I thought about the fact that our base still wasn't really named, and I was starting to get tired of saying fire station. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. A bit down the way was a house, a garage, and a barn off to the side. The barn yielded an electrical skill book, some materials, seeds. The house yielded nothing. The garage had yet another electrical skill book, and I walked over to find out if you can actually get hay from hay bales, which, spoiler alert, you can. So I tried to take a few with me. Unfortunately, I won't be able to store it in the trunk, and the trailer's feed storage was already full with animal feed bags, so I'd end up sticking them in some of the other seats in the car in order to take them back with me. I left the way I came, trying to trace my way back home. Not too far though, and my fingers disconnected from my brain and turned way too early into a turn and ended up crashing straight into a fence post and tree. Feeling pretty stupid, I backed up and tried to shrug off the mistake, promising to lock in. Along the way though, I glanced away from the game for a second when I got a text message, and when I looked back up, I unfortunately had already wrapped my hood around a tree. Unfortunate, stupid, and pointless damage to an otherwise very good car. Thankfully, it hadn't touched my engine or battery, though I don't know how since I was going a good 35 miles per hour both of those times. I guess the hood was just made out of diamond or something. A few hours later, and I'd made it back to Rosewood, and I pulled into the gas station to quickly refill. I got distracted though by a red car in the parking lot, which I spotted the keys from a small distance away. I took a quick look-see inside and through all the seats, and didn't find anything much of interest. A peek under the hood was enough to convince me this car was worth taking though, as it was in incredible condition. I then remembered that I hadn't looted the gas station fully yet, realizing I'd only ever gone in the store part itself. I checked the back first where all the overflow was, and hit the mother load. This would be an incredible bonus to come home with, so I stripped it clean before heading down to the basement. Creepy ass basement, might I add. Who has this? This looks like a genuine torture chamber. At this point, I was wishing I'd looted this when I was here the first time, back when the lights could still be turned on. There wasn't much down here either, just lots of empty gas cans, a bit of junk food, and a few catalogs. I checked the food and figured I could always come back to the gas cans later. The upstairs apartment area was quaint and unfortunately didn't bring much loot. I grabbed what I could though and checked the trunk of the Nyala before pulling the Primani out of the gas station and forgetting to fill it up. As I was pulling into the base, I noticed a few zombies had migrated into the area. I quickly took them out on foot, not wanting them to damage my newly constructed walls, before pulling around to drop the cow off at her new home. I zoned it out, and then we had a cow. I quickly named her Abigail before detaching the trailer from the Primani and bringing it into the garage to begin the unloading process. Now, I'd like to consider myself a pretty organized person, but unfortunately the loot dumping process, when you have 20 different containers for each type of specific item, takes a long time. Like, a long time. I really do hate it. I grabbed a few of the animal feed bags from my trunk and quickly threw them into one of the troughs in the cow pen and sheep pen. I thought it would have rained by now, so I felt a little bad she'd have to go without water, but I was definitely not going to waste my precious resources I had in my base. Needing a break, I stopped dumping for a bit when I came up the stairs and saw the giant pile of books that my bookcase couldn't hold anymore in the rec room, and I was pretty tired of looking at them. One of the rooms I wanted in my base was to take over a meeting room and turn it into a library for all of my books, so I turned my attention to that. I headed back down to drop off some planks in there to make the bookcase construction a little easier, made a stir fry, and I resolved to sleep for now as it was super early in the morning. Day 22, and I grabbed my welding mask and a few torches to begin deconstructing the chairs we had in there. I had no need for them, and if I wanted different furniture in the future for whatever reason, I wanted to make it myself. Once the area was clear, save for a few tables I left, I started placing the first few bookcases. One after another, I lined the closest wall to the door with new shelves, hoping to encompass the area in literature. Then it was on to taking all the books up off the floor from the old shelf, and glad that I was doing so too, as it was lagging me pretty bad. As I began unloading the cart of books I'd brought from upstairs, I tried to organize them in a nice way. The first shelf on the right would be for more natural focuses like foraging, agriculture, animal care, trapping, fishing, etc. The second would be for more industrial skills like blacksmithing, carpentry, and electrical. The next was for more artisan crafts like glassmaking, carving. And the next for combat-related skills like reloading, aiming, and longblade. And the last one for miscellaneous skills like first aid. Across the aisle, I'd set up a few more bookcases for things like entertainment value books, and then for paperbacks and actual books. I then removed any duplicate skill books I had, putting them into the trunk of my car to dump at some point as I didn't need more than one of each. I grabbed up the planks I had over by the fence lines and put the extras into the back of my trunk when my game crashed again. When I got back in, the day had weirdly reset to the next one, almost like I had never left the bed from day 22 but the following day. So now we were on day 23, I guess. A bit depressed by my game breaking, I tried to shrug it off and remain productive. I figured at the least I could go back for that other bull and took the red car from the garage to hook it up to the trailer once more around the back of the base. As always, I made a pit stop at the gas station to fill up my car and realized I didn't actually need to be hauling this generator back and forth like I had been. If I just kept it at the gas station and remembered to turn it back off when I was finished, there's no reason for it to take 30 pounds of storage in my truck. Now that my car was filled, back on the road I went, taking the farther back entrance of the gas station to keep a low profile from Rosewood's residents' assholes. I passed the hacksaw blade factory, and on my way up the road towards the farmer stand, I hit a tree inside my car and trailer, careening to the side. My car is now unfortunately pretty beaten up, and I do my best to unlatch my trailer and flip it over. The animation doesn't load all the way, and I get worried that I wouldn't be able to recover my trailer, but thankfully it snaps back into place once it's connected again. Phew! Back on the road, I pass the farmer's stand and head up the gravel road. Pretty soon the ranch gate greets me and I pull in. The bull I'd left behind quite clearly had missed his missus, as he had waited at the gate this entire time. I felt a little bad, but I was here for him now, so I collected him and threw him in the back of the trailer. I still had a bit of space left, and I remembered back to when I had taken Nike with me from his facility. He hadn't taken much space, so I hiked over to the barn to see if I could take any of the horses home with me too. Instead of having to lead one of the horses all the way over, it was easier if I just rode her, so I hopped on the Palomina's back and galloped her back over to where I had parked. Unfortunately, it was a lot the same as trying to fit another cow in the back, and it just wasn't going to work. So I threw the Palomino back in the cow pen, knowing there was still food and water left for her until I came back again. I sucked that the trailer was so small, but there wasn't anything else I could do really except for continuing to make these back and forth trips. I headed on my way back home, thankful to have at least managed to get the bull and secure milk for my little faction. On my way back, I almost crashed our vehicle, but otherwise uneventful. Finally back at base, I opened the gates to let myself in and pulled my bull into his pen. As I did so, his girlfriend wandered over, happy to finally be reunited once more. As I'm about to pull my trailer over to disconnect it for the day, I remember something cool I'd seen on the first few days that I had looted the police station almost 20 days ago. I bring the trailer with me as I wanted to test it out when I got there, and a few minutes later, the McLaren comes into view. I'm not exactly sure what bougie officer might be able to pay for such a stunning vehicle on their salary, but what do I know? What I did know was that now it was mine. I could immediately see a key on the ground, and with any luck it'd be to the car I've got my sights on, but unfortunately to the dart next to it. On the other side of the fence, though, I see another pair of keys, and I hesitantly wander over, trying not to draw the attention of the bystanders ways off. My curiosity was rewarded, however, when it turned out to be exactly what I was looking for, a key to the McLaren GTS. Now I could peruse the apocalypse in style. Rounding the fence, I checked the car for its condition, and I wasn't exactly sure if the mod that added it would have exterior damage showing. It's in pretty stunning shape, all things considered, and it doesn't escape my notice that for whatever reason, the vehicle mechanics are at the back of the car and the trunk is in the front. Maybe that's a real-life McLaren thing, I'm too poor to know the answer to that. As long as both were functional, it didn't really matter though. At least it has gas in it, even if it wasn't that much. Most of my sentimentality for the cars leaves my body in this moment, and while I was planning on keeping the red dart and repairing it as I feared the apocalypse, my brain was only focused on looking swag as fuck. So I took the remaining gas from the dart to put into my McLaren, detached the trailer, parked the dart in the police station lot, and left with my new McLaren and animal trailer. I quickly realized how annoying it'd be, though, to use this as my main vehicle with the trailer attached as the tires squealed at the slightest turn. My limits are quite low for that type of thing. I arrived at home in my new whip, left the trailer in front of the garage, and put the McLaren into it. It dawned on me that it was August now, and that I could start planting seeds for that month. I started mowing through most of the info magazines I had in my farming storage, hoping to increase my agriculture knowledge and hopefully I'd have some seeds to plant. It was also raining now, so I had the good sense to run to the kitchen and drop off any and all water containers I had to get as much as I possibly could. Later boil it for safe drinking and for making stews. Attention back on farming now, and with all my magazines read, I checked my agriculture knowledge list to see what I could plant. Unfortunately, the only thing I had to plant right now was garlic, and that was a grow time of a whopping 240 days. That was kind of insane. Whatever though, at least I'd be growing something. So, with the shovel in hand, I wandered over to where I wanted my farming area to be and started mowing. I only had one packet of garlic seeds, which was only 5 seeds, so I made a 3x2 space to plant them in. Now that they had been planted, I grabbed some of my full watering containers on my way inside and popped them into the oven to sterilize the water, which I could then safely turn into stews. I wouldn't have to worry about cooking food for a fat minute now. 5 stews later, and I'd remembered that I had buckets in the garage, and placed them outside to start catching rainwater. Buckets were pretty OP as they held 10 liters each, and I had 3 of them with me, so 30 easy liters of water was pretty amazing. I check the time and notice how late it is, and I'm pretty tired, so I run inside and fall asleep next to Dorothy as she hangs out in a bedside table. Day 24, and I start by refilling my water bottle at the jug of water we have in the dispenser downstairs in one of the old office spaces. There's a rack on my right full of materials that I hadn't noticed before, and I was pleasantly surprised to find a box of nails in it, which I take a look at what it's got. I'd started to get worried about my generator's fuel as I hadn't checked it in a while, and I almost gave myself a heart attack when I click on the wrong one and it says fuel 0%. The one that's on is still all the way at 90% fuel, and I stopped worrying about it so much now that I've been reassured that with only the bare essential lights on, we're not using very much. Determined to head back out for animals, I then decided to try using the square red car with my trailer, and I find it only slightly less annoying with the tires squealing. I load up the ABS channel as a preset, and I listen to it as I stop at the warehouse to check out the truck front I'd marked on my map a while ago. I thought for a moment that I might take the front with me, but I figured I'd rather come home with a full tractor trailer, front and payload both, so I decided to come back for it. An hour or so later, I pull back into that ranch to find the Palomino mare staring at me from the fence line the same way the bull had. This time I had an empty trailer that I knew she'd fit into, so I load her in to find that there's a lot more space in this trailer left. I decided to risk it, and while I know I wouldn't be able to load up one of the beef cattle, I ran up the dirt path to collect the blue roan mare. I didn't want to leave her baby distressed by taking them one at a time, so I attached the foal to a rope and hopped on her mom's back and ponied her over to the trailer where I thankfully had space for them both. It felt pretty nice to have 3 horses in my trailer, even if it didn't realistically know how the hell I could have fit all of them in there comfortably, and with a tiny bit of room to spare apparently. The drive home from this ranch is pretty familiar to me now, and I do make a pit stop by the warehouses near the construction site to see if there was anything worth taking. Specifically, I wanted nails, as those were going to run out before I ran out of trees, but only came across planks, so I ran back to my car to go home. Finally, in Rosewood again, I passed a fire department vehicle in what looked like to be very good shape as I was passing by the motel, and made a mental note to come back for that later. Finally, back at base, I unloaded the new horses into their paddock, and Nike looked pretty happy to have company. It wasn't too late in the day, so I ditched the red car to take my new McLaren out for a spin on a run to the gas station to fill up my reserves and take all the empty gas cans I had found but not taken in the station's basement, taking my blue Valuetech generator with me. Figured if I was going to have a generator stay at the gas station, I might as well make it the cheaper one, as it'll only ever be on when I need gas. Just in the nick of time though, the McLaren ran out of the limited gas it had to begin with, right by the front of the station, so I had to walk over to the pump, fill a tank, add it into the McLaren, and then drive it the rest of the way over. I removed a few spectators off to the side, then went inside with my flashlight to collect all those forgotten cans. It could never hurt to have reserves. I filled them all up next to the pump where I parked, then got out of Dodge. That was when I realized just how unrealistic it'd be for me to use the McLaren as a main vehicle, as it ate gas like no one's business, and I decided to go check out the fire department vehicle on the way home. To my surprise, it was in very, very good condition, and I was lucky enough to find the key in the glove box. It felt appropriate, after all, to have a fire department vehicle as a resident of the fire department itself. Given that it had less horsepower than the McLaren, I towed it home in my supercar. I had filled the McLaren's tank up to full at the gas station, and by the time I got home, it was half tank. Definitely not a car I could use on the regular. Unfortunately, it would likely meet the same fate as most supercars, which would be to warm my garage. I dealt some unnecessary damage to my new vehicle, as the McLaren would stop too quickly and the other would run into it and damage both the front of itself and the bumper of the McLaren, so when I arrived at the gate, I decided to cut my losses and disconnect them to take them in one by one. I prepared for another run out with the animal trailer in the morning by attaching it and bringing the vehicles to the gate where I could easily open it and head out when the time came. Afterwards, I ran upstairs to get a bite to eat from some leftover stew and threw my seeds into my gardening half of the container in the storage room. That reminded me to check on my garlic's water levels, which were well watered still from the previous rain, and I decided to spend the rest of the night reading the first agriculture book until it was time for bed. Day 25, I woke up feeling great, and I ran down the stairs to start on my outings early. A quick peek out the gate to make sure it was safe, and I hopped in my new car. Before heading out, though, I decided to send all 5 of my people out on a scavenging mission to yet another neighborhood I hadn't been to before, and having little luck in the food department from all our previous missions, I didn't check anything off the menu of what to grab. This time I wanted to head to the other gas station nearby, which was out in the direction of the drive-in movie theater, where I looted the store for goodies and found 2 truck faces. The key was nearby for the purple one, so now I wouldn't have to go so far as the saw blade factory to get one.
Hey!
I also filled my water up into the bathroom, as I wouldn't be coming to these things frequently enough to have consequences of using up their water stores. Once finished, I wanted to try checking out some of the farms that were southeast of where I was living, so I hopped on a wide highway until I came across a gravel road not too far down the way. I spotted chickens in a pasture next to a house, so I quickly looted it for anything that may help me, and down the driveway I found a few zombies guarding the garage. I made quick work with them, and ended up having to break the side of the window to get in. Inside was a red generator, and I didn't feel like I needed yet another one of those at this time, so I opted to take some of the farming materials in the storage cabinet instead. To the side were a few fields, and one of which had cattle, so I brought the trailer inside and found that this car did way better on off-road terrain than any of my previous vehicles, which was a relief. Before heading to the animals though, I grabbed up a bunch of hay bales from the shed next to the field and loaded them. I didn't even want to think about how my animals were going to get food when the cold months came around, and the only way to do that was to ensure that I had enough animal feed bags, grass cuttings, and stored hay. I took a great many, then made my way into the cattle field to find it belonged to more Holstein cattle, which was perfect. I grabbed a mama and her baby and decided I was going to slaughter the bull for meat, as I had already had one at home. But the game was having some kind of an aneurysm, and once I killed the bull, it stopped recognizing it was there, so I couldn't butcher it. I felt like a giant waste to have done that, and I felt really just terrible about it, but there wasn't much I could do, so I left. My map told me there was another property down the road, so I followed it to another barn where I'd find some materials, saddlebags, and animal feed. I broke into one of the houses without finding much of interest, and unfortunately the one across the way was the same. Given that it was getting later though, I opted to hang out in the house for the night and read my agriculture book until it was too dark to read, and I'd fall asleep. Day 26, I quickly looted the kitchen before jumping in my car to leave. I had plenty of storage in the trunk, so I wanted to load it up as much as I could. Almost directly across the road from the two houses I'd been at was a farmer's market, so I made a pit stop to see if there were any seeds for sale. Unfortunately, it was just a bunch of now rotten food, and I kicked myself that I hadn't come here sooner. Determined for more though, I kept going, stopping at a very nice looking house. I could hear a zombie banging on a door from within, so I played it safe by yelling and waiting for it to come outside. Apparently there were more than I realized though, as I ended up killing not one, not two, but 3 before zombies from within the house, leveling up my long blunt skill in the process. This house had lots of tools and miscellaneous stuff that I felt might be nice to have, and with the intimate feeling storage of my new trunk, I decided to go a bit wild with it. Once all of that was loaded up, I continued down the sandy road to a barn where they had more farming equipment. A small neighborhood was next, and I pulled in and noticed they had some chicken and sheep. I figured this was as good of an opportunity as any to take them with me, so I grabbed the ram first and forgot I had a cow and her baby in there already. Unfortunately, I'd end up having to come back for them, it seemed, so I marked their location on my map and returned the ram to his herd. The house was still pretty slim pickings, but it did have a storage room with cardboard boxes full of useful books. It must have been owned by a designer or something, though, as the basement was full of leather jackets. They had pretty good protection stats, so I took a few with me. Given that I had now found sheep and my trailer was empty, I saved the rest of the neighborhood to be looted for another time, and headed home with my trunk full of goodies and my animals safely in my trailer. I unloaded my cow with her new herd, and her baby ran after her. Unfortunately, it was now time for the massive loot dump that I'd collected. My favorite thing is heading out and getting a bunch of useful stuff, but the organization part of it sucked. I'd listen to the demon on my shoulder and just dump it all with no rhyme or reason, but that would be even more painful later to try and find something specific and a mess of junk. And with that it began, and I stopped to chat with Romeo for a moment while I did. I really did want to make more of an effort to be friendly with my teammates, but it was hard to be consistent when they only seemed to improve on your relationship points once per day, meaning you'd only have to consistently speak with them each day, which is harder to do in video game context than it is in a real life one. That being said, I also didn't want them to resent me or for them to become violent and begin stealing, so I suppose it was a small sacrifice to make. I did the same with Dorothy and Angie and continued my loot jump. A few hours later and it began to rain, so I paused my efforts to lay out some of the empty buckets I'd collected to make sure we were getting enough rainwater. The way rainwater collectors work is a little strange, honestly, and I don't think they fill up fast enough. Not to say that that's a bad thing, because realistically that's probably as much as they'd actually collect, but buckets fill with 10 liters of water super quick in the rain, and rain collectors take much longer to collect that much, I've noticed. Just food for thought. Back to the grind though. I stopped around midnight to sleep, happy to have cleared out most of that loot run already. Day 27, I wanted to collect those sheep, so I took the car I'd named Red out of the garage, hooked up the trailer, and headed back out to the neighborhood from yesterday. It didn't take me long to arrive, and I immediately got to work loading up the animals into the back of the trailer, and by the end of it, I had a grand total of 4 sheep. Not terribly impressive, but a good starting herd nonetheless. Trailer full, it was now the rest of the neighborhood's turn, and I not so surprisingly didn't have much of use. And a few hours later, I was leaving it behind. A bit up the road was a military base, so I stopped there to find some tools in the shed inside of it and a black dart in relatively good condition but without a key. If I wanted to come back for this car, I'd have to learn to hotwire first, and I wasn't very close to that point yet. Now, I'd learned from past experiences that there wasn't really anything to be had at these military checkpoint locations. There's a bunch of rooms with almost no containers, a cafeteria, and sometimes an office, so it's not really worth the time it takes to individually get into these buildings, as they didn't have anything of import. I left shortly after and came across a neighborhood of large houses with 2 barns to the side, so I looted those and got more of the usual farming material loot. Predictably, these houses weren't filled with much that I needed at this point, but I'd waste the rest of the day and all of the following day, number 28, to loot them regardless. I would only finally arrive home on day 28, only to forget to record that process, begin construction of a shed to put all my farming and animal stuff in, and finally remember to record on the afternoon of day 29, when I immediately went to grab something to eat. I ran out the back of the base to put in some crates to store all this stuff in, and couldn't for the life of me remember the name of a crate. Gave up looking for it and instead decided to work on the outer rim of the second story portion of the wall. Only to do that and instead fall, not realize I broke my leg, and quickly die after. Yeah. Little did I know that this was the unfortunate start to a very bad down spiral. I awoke in the same house I spawned in at, and dropped some of the heavy loot I'd been carrying to get home faster, as it was going to start getting dark soon. I headed up familiar roads, anxious to get back home after a scary thing like that. What I'd failed to notice at the time was the lack of designation of the safe house, and how all of my friends had gone missing from my radar. Not thinking anything of it, and anxious more than anything over what had just happened, I tried to grab something to eat. Right after, though, a familiar face came strutting up behind me, but without recognition in his eyes. It was Bradley. With his weapon raised high, he demanded my name and that I needed to leave. It was then that it struck me. I hadn't thought about whether the respawn mod and the Nox event expanded mod were compatible, and realized with growing dread that they, in fact, didn't. Heart racing, I tried claiming the fire department as my own safe house. I checked my list and no NPCs are added, so I know right then that I wasn't for it. In a desperate attempt to speak to him, I tried adding him back to my group, trying to convince him that it really was still me. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and I had to gun him down in our kitchen. Romeo and Carissa came running in after him, and I had to bite my lip and pull the trigger twice more. Horrified, I ran outside. What had I done? But I knew that none of my friends would listen to me, none would recognize me, and that I had to kill them if I didn't want them to kill me, especially after what I'd done. I held back tears as conflicting emotions rose, and I came inside to hold my gun up in front of me, aiming at people I never thought I'd need to aim at. I saw Angie and Dorothy in the medical bay and had a brief moment of hopefulness when they didn't immediately attack me, but I knew there were more elsewhere, so if they weren't my adversaries now, I'd try to keep it that way for a little longer. However, I was wrong. As I left the room, they came running over to me with weapons raised. There's nothing I could do. I drew my gun and began firing round after round. In an alarming moment of clarity, I knew I had to reclaim their useful armor and weapons, and I sickeningly began removing their garments. Bradley, Carissa, and Romeo all faced the same desecration, and I felt ill to my stomach over it. It was all I could do to empty the remaining water container I'd gathered in the kitchen, panicking over the thought that I had just gone on this food and water run for my friends, only to be unpacking it with their corpses right behind me. I couldn't bring myself to move their bodies, though. I was still in shock. I continued unloading the loot I had brought myself back to a good mental state enough to be able to think straight, and without being able to even look at them, I had to fall asleep with their bodies collecting flies throughout the night. Day 30 was upsetting. I had gained some semblance of myself again in the morning, and woke up determined to put my friends to rest. They deserved that much, even if I was the one to put all those bullets in them. I grabbed a shovel, and it was appropriately raining as I began digging graves for them by the gate. I felt that way they'd still be there to greet me, a place I could remember them each time I left and returned. My muscles, strained from fighting the last few days, screamed in agony as I dug, but I knew I couldn't let that stop me. My friends needed to be put to rest. I dug 5 next to each other so that they could all still be together, and as I did it, I cursed every time I had ever called them anything less than my friends. I had taken having them for granted many a time, and now it was too late to do anything about it. I couldn't wash their blood from my hands. There wasn't any dignified way I could remove their bodies, so I dragged them by their shoulders and feet. They each got their own grave, and while I'd never been a very religious person, I said a quiet and quick prayer for them. It wasn't until much later that they would be finally put to rest. Trying to take my mind off the whole ordeal was impossible with the blood smears from my friends' bodies, but I attempted it by making stews. Now they wouldn't be eaten so quickly without the others, and that was a morbid thought. Now eerily quiet, I tried to focus on the task that had originally made us this issue, crates to store animal things. It felt like years had passed and I still hadn't unloaded everything in that trunk. I had just murdered my friends, and now I also had to go through the arduous task of putting all my loot away. Nevertheless, I had to move on. I couldn't let this ever come to pass again, and I was now smarter for it. With the shovel still in my inventory, I decided I was going to make the floor now so that the crates weren't on straight grass. Unfortunately, I also wasn't ready to sacrifice a bunch of wood that I didn't have, nor the people to get it for me, so I opted for a dirt floor instead. At least it wouldn't grow anything inside. I wanted the highest quality crates as I believed that they stored the most, but I wasn't high enough carpentry level to make them yet. I was also really hurting for storage though, and I needed it even if it ended up being ugly. I filled up at one of the water fountains instead. Thankful to have so many sinks in this place for quick water refills. I decided to rest for the day before moving all my farm equipment into the shed, and I slept in an extra quiet room for the first time in over 20 days. Thank you everyone so much for watching. I definitely didn't see this death coming, and it's a bit embarrassing as I usually know better, but it's an unfortunate part of this game that I just have to learn and move on from. There are more game-breaking sequences coming up sadly, but it does all manage to get figured out in the end, but such is the life of Build 42 Project ZOMBOID, so I'm glad that I added all the cheesy mods that I did. Anyway, if you're enjoying the series, don't forget to like and subscribe as it really does help me out, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye!